lot has happened here, and we've seen many different characters come and go. Discovering these stories and how things have changed over time can be a bit of an adventure for those who are curious.
The mummified remains of a 50,000-year-old wolf pup have been found preserved in the Yukon permafrost. This rare and exciting find will help scientists understand more about this important Ice Age predator and its links to the wolves we see in the Yukon today.
We ravens have been around since the beginning, and we've seen it all. In my mind, to really understand the story of this place, you've got to look at it from the right point of view, both in perspective and time. With a keen eye, you can see how, over time, this place I call home has been changed by water and ice and being the bridge that has connected continents. So let me show you. To do this, we will need to travel back to the time of the last great ice age. Actually, we need to go back a bit further than those glaciers. We need to go back about 125,000 years when, on the surface, the Yukon might have looked an awful lot like it does today.
There are comments
Some
here.
of the plants and animals you would see were different back then. Some moved in from other places, while others were just passing through. And some of them, like me, have stayed and still call this place home. But things are always changing. There are times when, depending on the angle of the Earth, its orbit around the sun, and climate feedback loops, our planet cools and immense sheets of ice, or glaciers, build up and cover the land. This has happened many times. The last began about 100,000 years ago. It got cold. Water froze and stopped flowing into the ocean, and the sea level gradually dropped enough to expose the sea floor between North America and Siberia, creating a piece of land that was as large as British Columbia and Alberta together. It became a crossroads between continents in the heart of Beringia. This place got cold and very dry. Instead of forests, it became a vast and rich tundra grassland that stretched from Europe to the Yukon. Fine silts created by the grinding glaciers blew in drifts across the land, and the remains of animals that lived at that time give us the clues to what happened next.
Paleontologists have discovered a 700,000-year-old horse bone with preserved DNA at a Yukon placer gold mine. This partnership between researchers and miners has led to the discovery of world-class remains of Ice Age animals that is helping answer questions about the evolution of animals in North America.
As a paleontologist, we study the fossil remains of plants and animals and try to understand how those plants and animals interacted with their environments in the past. One of the best places to study fossils of ancient animals and plants from the Ice Age is here in the Klondike Goldfields near Dawson City, Yukon. During the Klondike Gold Rush in the late 1800s, thousands of people came north to the Yukon to find their fortune. As these miners dug through layers of frozen earth and gravel, some found gold, but many others found the bones of giant beasts that defied imagination.
Wow.
Part of the reason is found in the ground itself. During cold times when ice sheets advanced,
we passed the
the climate would have been very dry with strong winds.
Yeah.
These winds blew fine silt or dust from the glaciers across the landscape. It accumulated in deep drifts and bands. When animals died during the Ice Age, their remains were quickly buried in the frozen soil and perfectly preserved. It was like a giant deep freeze. When water from rivers erodes their banks, or placer miners use huge hydraulic water cannons to expose the permafrost, it can reveal incredible fossils of Ice Age animals. This is an Ice Age Arctic ground squirrel nest that was found preserved in the permafrost. Arctic ground squirrels are still with us in the Yukon today, but they've evolved in Beringia for hundreds of thousands of years. These nests of Arctic ground squirrels are like a time capsule of plants that lived here during the Ice Age. They really tell us about the environment that was here when woolly mammoths were roaming the landscape.
But it's not just ground squirrels that we find.
It's there. Have you seen
We
that?
find all sorts of bones from all kinds of different animals, from horses to mammoths and even saiga antelope. The most abundant bones we find out in the Klondike are from the ancient steppe bison. We think of bison as iconic animals of the Wild West, but actually they arrived from the north. They did very well in this cold grassland environment. Here you can see some of the bones that we found. The fact that so many bison remains are found in the Klondike muck tells us that they were a surprisingly important part of the Ice Age ecosystem. One of the things that we can learn from bison bones is who is eating them. We find chew marks on a lot of the bones from predators like Ice Age lions and scimitar cats.
Oh,
Wolves and short-faced bears were also important carnivores, but probably more as scavengers. Finding fossils of large predators is actually quite rare, but if you know where to look, you can find hints about them everywhere.
When you put all the clues together, you start to see how the plants and animals responded to a changing climate. As the glaciers advanced, they forced trees and shrubs to the south and to lower elevations. Animals that relied on those plants for food had to follow them in order to survive. Take the mastodon. It had teeth that looked like this. It had cone-shaped cusps that were used for breaking and grinding branches and twigs. But about 75,000 years ago, climates got really cold and dry in the north, and the trees vanished. This made it really difficult for mastodons to survive here, and their populations disappeared. The mammoth, on the other hand, had teeth with ridges that looked like this. These molars were extremely well adapted to grinding grasses, and they continued to thrive in Alaska and Yukon.
Yep, food was an issue.
Raven.
We're just being able to make it in the cold. Some of us were just a lot better at it.
I think that's the tundra, right?
Scientists don't have all the answers as to why some animals disappeared, but if you ask me,
They
I think
migrated.
some of them just might have been too much trouble. But for those of us who were able to adapt, things were pretty good on the cold, windy grasslands. People were a part of this landscape too. Researchers have found sites in Siberia showing evidence of human activity that are over 20,000 years old. They show that by that time, people had adapted and learned how to live in the cold Arctic environment. In Alaska and Yukon, there are places that are about 15,000 years old and show people had brought these same technologies developed in the cold Siberian grasslands to the heart of Beringia. By 10,000 years ago, there are sites everywhere that show people had occupied all of the Americas. Other things were changing too. The Earth started to warm up again. The ice sheet started to melt and everything got much wetter. This warming marked the end of the Ice Age. It was the last time that mammoths and other Ice Age animals roamed this landscape. But the warming temperatures brought new life and new beginnings. Water, lakes, rivers, and streams started running across the grasslands, letting new vegetation grow and shaping the land. These changes happened slowly, and everything living here at the time had to adapt again in order to survive. people were pretty good at this. They were well versed in the rhythms of the seasons. They understood where to find the best places to hunt and gather. And as the ice moved, they found new places to thrive. They told stories to share their knowledge about the land and the animals and ensure the survival of their families and communities.
Yukon archaeologists have uncovered a new site along the Yukon River that is providing clues about what life was like for people in the territory about 15,000 years ago.
Archaeologists learn about human history by studying the remains at sites like this one at Britannia Creek. This is an interesting site for us because it's one of the oldest sites we know of in the Yukon, and it's very rare for a site to survive over 15,000 years. The Britannia Creek site has survived until today because it's on a bedrock ridge. When the river was next to this site, this would have been an ideal location for a camp. So when we look for sites like this one at Britannia Creek, we won't find them along the existing riverbank. This would have been a broad floodplain filled with a braided stream with multiple channels. An archaeologist will review topographic maps and air photos and look at the landscape and look at the evidence on the landscape that tells that story of the changes that have occurred over time.
Rivers were an important part of life 15,000 years ago. They provided travel routes for people. They were also important parts of the ecosystem. They gave people access to water. They were also important habitat for a variety of animals that people were harvesting. They were harvesting bison, elk, caribou, and we also know that within a few generations, people started harvesting salmon. Salmon remains are being found at eastern Beringian sites, maybe 13 to 12,000 years ago. We are also finding lots of tools and other objects at these excavations that are showing us how people were adapting to this rapidly warming climate and changing environment. Here is a very important species of bison bone that people would have hunted at Britannia Creek, and chipstone points like these that would have been mounted in spear shafts. It is one of the few types of ancient Ice Age tools that actually survives the millennia. For archaeologists like us, it is very important to work with local First Nations at these sites because it helps us understand their connection with this land, and it helps us understand lifestyles in the very ancient past and connect them with lifestyles closer to the present day.
Being a part of this work is important to our First Nation and our people. It not only helps us understand some of the clues that archaeologists uncovered, but also allows us to share our knowledge and experiences to help better understand these discoveries.
Since Trondheim built the Dono-Jatjo Cultural Center, they wanted to be able to share pieces of their history and culture with visitors, but also with the community, to bridge more of a relationship with the community about their own history. Now that we are self-governing nations, and Trondheim in particular have worked quite closely with archaeologists, I think it has helped to bring a understanding between First Nation and non-First Nation culture. The archaeology certainly supports the work and the stories that already have existed here.
When you were raised in a small little village, you learn to share with others. Sharing is really important, and we do that still today. I really quite enjoy working with the young people and talking about the respect for all the food that the land offers you. Our life is so important, we have to respect everything.
Rivers are the lifeblood of the Yukon's landscape. They are a focus for people and animals and movement through our territory. And while they still change our landscape, they remind us of the things that remain constant and what connects us. And what what we learn from the past only helps us understand what might be in store for us in the future. It helps us see what a changing climate will mean to the land, the animals, and the people who live here, and in other parts of the world. What we know is that we are all connected, not just today, but going back through time. And our knowledge is our wealth. We need to use it wisely and ensure a vibrant future for the generations to come. So while you travel through the Yukon, take some time to look around. Beringia is gone, but so much of it still remains. See if you can spot those clues that provide the link to our Ice Age past and the time when this place was a crossroads of the continents. Who knows what adventures you might have and what you might discover.
So vast.